Hey everybody, Ben here, and today I'm doing something a little bit different. Today I wanted to do a quick deck tech for the deck that I am going to be playing in the Shuffle Bus League. It has just started and we've completed the first week, but I thought it might be interesting to take a look at the deck I'm playing, sort of explain where it has some good strengths, some of its weaknesses, just to give you guys kind of a sense of how it works, how I approached it, and sort of what I value within the deck. The key components of this deck are the Nova Elementalist and Darkheart Sorcerer. This is a known combo. I've been playing this deck for a couple months now, and the way that the deck works is the goal is to get the Nova Elementalist out as quickly as possible. That'll play the card Rumblespark Energy, which reads, your creatures in this lane are also elementals, and when one of your elementals deals damage to the enemy player, transform this and put it into an empty lane. That transform becomes Rumblespark Embodiment, which is a 4/8 elemental that gets +4 every time you play a spell, so +4 attack every time. Then when it's destroyed, it transforms back into the Rumblespark Energy. The way it works with Darkheart Sorcerer is whenever you play a spell, if the Rumblespark Energy is played into his lane, it will automatically trigger the Transform clause and bring the Rumblespark Embodiment back out. The way Transform is currently ruled is it's considered playing a card. So since the Exalt is a spell, as soon as the Rumblespark Embodiment would die, it will immediately trigger the Darkheart and effectively reanimate. Technically it doesn't die, so dies, triggers, and things like that don't actually apply to this, but essentially what you have is a very resilient threat that forces your opponent to deal with the Darkheart before they can really deal with the embodiment. And you can get this out as early as turn 1 if you happen to draw the Elementalist and the Sorcerer in the same opening hand. So it's a very potent combo. It does have some weaknesses. But one of the biggest strengths of this combo is that the Rumblespark Embodiment is a level 3 creature. A lot of the unconditional removal in this game is level gated, meaning that things like Botanimate or Dreadbolt cannot target this in the first and second cycle, especially if they haven't leveled it up. So it's very resilient to being removed by effects that would transform it, or replace it rather. So Botanimate does not work on it until cycle 3. The only things that can really forcibly get rid of it are some of the set 1 cards, such as Leyline Vermin, Nap Time. Those two will weaken it, remove its text, and prevent it from transforming if you're able to destroy it that turn. But that does take a couple different things to line up to ensure that happens. And if you can't, it will just keep recurring and coming back. So this is a known quantity now. I think there's been several decks were played at Indianapolis using this combo. I don't believe any of them placed within the top 4 of that tournament, but it did have a pretty decent representation. For my particular one, I want to go over the deck that I'm playing. First, we'll take a look at the Tempes here to see what I got. I actually got this deck at Fuse Fest in Tulsa back in February. And it's one of the decks that I did play in that tournament. So I'm just going to go ahead and go down the list of each of the cards in the deck, what role they play, and kind of my priority in terms of when I want to play them, what situations that I found that they tend to work the best. But before we do that, let's go ahead and take a look at the Forgeborns that these two decks provide. The first is Korok. He has Demolish at cycle 2, Lightning Speed at cycle 3, and Earthen Fist at cycle 4. So we have a conditional removal spell or removal effect, a way to give our creatures aggressive, and another removal effect at the end. I've tried both, and then with Cersei we have Life Drain, Death Touch, and then Army Commander. And I've tried with both Forgeborn before, and I find that Cersei's a bit more reliable than Korok in terms of what the deck is trying to do. It's trying to be aggressive and putting a lot of pressure on your opponent's resources. So being able to just remove blockers is kind of critical to this deck. The giving things aggressive is not as critical, and one of the reasons is if you're getting the Rumble Spark out and you're getting it to recur, it will often be in the front lane most of the time. It also doesn't help with the Sorcerer that much because the Sorcerer has Defender, so giving it aggressive doesn't really do anything. So it doesn't really meld well with what the deck is trying to do. So I prefer Circe just as a way to finish off a blocker, get a blocker out of the way so that once I put enough pressure on the opponent, I can try and close it out either late cycle 2 or early cycle 3. So let's take a look at what cards we've got. I'm going to start with the creatures. So obviously we have the Nova Elementalist. Let's see, play the Rumble Spark in level 1. You activate it for the level 2 version to deal damage equal to the number of elementals you have in play. And then, or so 2 for each elemental at level 2, and then 5 for each elemental at level 3. With this particular card, my deck does not have many elementals. So playing level 1 is important, playing level 2 and 3 is not as important. There are a couple situations where I want to play 2 and 3, and I'll get into that a little bit later. But for the most part, really this is just a card I want to get out as soon as possible. And I only really care about getting out the level 1 to get the Rumble Spark energy going. The next one I want to talk about is the Herald of Fury. So this is a new card as well from White Fang Pass. What it does, it's a 5/3. When it comes into, when you deploy it, you may have it deal 5 damage to one of your creatures. Then if the creature is not destroyed, you can play a level 1 spell for free. It is level gated, but the damage doesn't change as it levels up. So it's always 5 damage, but it increases the level of the spell you can play when you play it. And then once you get to level 3 with it, it can actually damage itself and survive. So it becomes sort of like a Spite Maiden that doesn't hurt you. It just hurts itself. So it's just an extra body with a free spell attached to it. Another important thing that we'll see in a little bit is that it's a warrior and a mage. So it has some interesting synergies in this deck as well. The thing about this card in this particular deck is it's kind of a coin flip whether I can or will play this card. In the first cycle, I only have, I believe, 4 creatures that can survive the damage. One is Thundersoar, which is actually a very good combination to have, because damaging it's just going to pump the Thundersoar. So if I get both these in the same hand, and it's not competing for a Nova Elementalist or Darkheart, this might be the 2 cards that I want to play, as well as a third for a spell. Another creature that can survive it is the Unstable Vortex. This creature's strength lies in, it has 8 toughness. This creature's strength lies in that as you play spells, it'll get more powerful, and you want to actually sacrifice it to take out one of your opponent's creatures. So dealing damage to it, you don't care that much about. Darkheart's the next one that can survive the damage. This one's a little bit more tricky about whether you want to actually do that, because it will greatly weaken the Sorcerer, and the Sorcerer is such a important cog in the way this deck is intended to work. So if I don't think I can safely damage my Darkheart Sorcerer with the Herald and get away with it, if I think my opponent can do something like an Om Nom Nom or a Pyre Song or something to finish it off, I am hesitant to do that. And the last one that can survive it is the Hematophagic Walker, which has 6 health. Everything else in the deck has 5 or less at level 1. So getting him out in the first cycle can be tricky if I'm not just throwing him out there as a 5/3 for no value, because I have to both have a creature with high enough toughness to survive the damage and a spell worth playing. And the thing is once you miss it on the first cycle, it really gets weaker and weaker as the game goes on because of the level gated part of being able to play a free spell. So he's a kind of a coin flip depending on how the game is going and how things line up, whether or not he gets played. But he is very potent when you do play him. The next creature I'm going to talk about here is the Unstable Vortex a little bit more in detail. This is the only other elemental in the deck besides the Rumble Spark energy. So that is one of the reasons why Nova Elementalist at level 2 and 3 is not as important to this deck. Because I'm just not going to get, the most it's going to be doing is 2 to 5 damage. So it's not that strong. Its stats are not that high, so I'm not really playing it unless I can finish off creatures and get some board advantage. But to speak about Vortex on its own, level 1, it is a 1/8 that gets +2 every time you play a spell. It goes up to 211 and then to 316, and the attack buff increases to 3 and then to 4. And at all levels, you can activate deal damage equal to its attack and then destroy it. So it's a pretty strong card. This deck does want to play a lot of spells. It does have 8. It has a couple of different ways to increase power as well with the Spirit Golem Conclave. So I can put it in a lane with the Spirit Golem Conclave. That's a good synergy. Or just playing it down and triggering it doubly. So I can get, playing Spirit Golem Conclave into, or playing the Vortex into Spirit Golem Conclave, that gives it, immediately gives it 6 power. So that's pretty strong for a level 1 creature, and having the Conclave around afterwards. So this is one that I'd like to get out. I like it to be able to take a hit and then being able to sort of sacrifice it to finish off or destroy a creature. It's also another way to kind of skirt around getting an elemental to deal damage for the Rumblespark, because the Rumblespark doesn't care which elemental deals the damage, just that a elemental deals damage to your opponent to trigger. So there are situations in which I have to split my attackers if I don't have the Darkheart to try and get them through, one through the Rumblespark lane and one through the Unstable Vortex. And so it can really help me control where my opponent is going to play their creatures to try and stave off the Rumblespark flipping, because most people know by now that letting the Rumblespark flip, if you can avoid it, is not generally the winningest line. So yeah, I like the Vortex. I think it's a pretty strong card, especially because of how tough it is. It can take several hits while you grow it, and then the fact that you can basically nuke a creature right before it dies just has a lot of versatility. We talked a little bit about Thundersoar. Thundersoar is not the best card in this deck. It is a strong card, but the Herald of Fury is the only card that really interacts with it to increase its power. Otherwise, I have to rely on my opponent damaging it. And in general, it's fairly easy for a player to ignore it if you don't actually catch a creature with it to initially pump its attack. So I don't play Thundersoar all that often, but there are situations where it makes sense, especially if I have the Herald of Fury in the same hand. So, it's kind of, again, this is not like a high priority card in this deck, but it does have its place. Tortoise Colossus is another interesting one. This is another new creature. It has mobility 1 and Defender, but you can activate it to have it lose Defender and gain Aggressive. So it's one. I think it's the only aggressive creature in this deck. But if you're off Forge and your opponent leaves a Rumblespark energy in a free lane, it's a good way to surprise damage and flip the Rumblespark. It also has that mobility component, so it can do a good job of protecting my life total if I'm falling behind, or can be served as sort of like a multi-card removal in which I can catch something with it in one turn and then move it into a lane to catch another creature on another turn and try and 2-for-1 the opponent with it. So it's a little understated. 5/5 is a little shy. Like at each level, it's a little shy of baseline stats, but it's still pretty good, and it's got a lot of flexibility. So this guy will show up occasionally, but again, he's not a high priority. The last creature from the Tempe side is the Venerable Hawkrider, and this guy's kind of just a house. You don't want to play him in the first cycle because he has the play ability that cares about it being lower level than your Forgeborn. But the fact that it's Venerable gives it a really good stat line for being played in the second cycle. So it is a good underdrop, and it can very easily throw 13 damage on the board if you have 2 other creatures out of nowhere. And it also, the nice thing about this giving it to 2 other creatures is that it splits up your threats. It forces your opponent to look at multiple lanes to try and defend the damage, especially if you're pressuring their life total. So it scales from 3 to 5 to 7. It's always 2 creatures. Generally, I won't see it I will not play this more than once or twice in a game. Like, it'll either come out cycle 2 or 3 when it's relevant. I'll use it to try and finish off a creature, or if I have a creature that's that's in combat, that's going to, enter combat with another creature and it's got just a little short on attack, it's a good way to ensure a trade and leave sort of a body behind to do more work. So I actually do really like this card. It's not a high priority. It's very situational. It's very, very dependent on the board state. But since, like I said, this deck wants to really pressure life total, the 7 attack stat line is something that the opponent has to deal with. They do have to throw something in front of it or at least kill it, lest they be pummeled by it turn after turn. Let me go ahead and go into the Nekrium side creatures, and we'll take a look. I'll just go ahead and go down the list. So Abyssal Skeleton. This is a card I almost never play. It's very, very situational. 3/1 is atrocious stats in Cycle 1. It's not what I want to be doing. The only time that I will play this in Cycle 1 and possibly Cycle 2 is if it's, turn 3 of the cycle, I'm off Forge. So 2 conditions that are very low probability because it has to both show up in my hand on the 3rd turn of the cycle and I have to be off Forge. It's very rare I'll play this on Forge because it's very difficult to get it to proc that Abyssal effect, and there's just no way I'm playing that to something that my opponent can respond to. Now, if I can play it after my opponent has no more responses, it gives me that free extra kill, right? They have to sacrifice something at the end of whatever combat trade-off we're going for. So it can, depending on how creatures are lined up, it can take out a pretty big threat in that situation. But very, very situational. So I rarely end up playing this card. Now, one thing to note, though, is that if the game goes long into Cycle 4, I do have Army Commander 4. So I can use the Abyssal Skeleton's massive stat line in the late game as just a big beater. But by Cycle 4, at that point, the Abyssal part of it doesn't matter. It's just to use it to finish off the opponent or to take out a massive threat that I couldn't otherwise take out that cycle. We've already talked about Darkheart. Again, this deck has, let's see, it has the 7 base spells plus the Rumblespark Energy. So it is one of the important pieces for the Rumblespark Energy to keep it recurring and coming back and pinging away at the opponent's life total. Gloom Reaper Hag is another really good underdrop and a really good life total pressure piece. It's good in Cycle 1 and 2, even though it doesn't have a very good sort of stat progression. It still does work. 7 power can kill just about anything. If you can throw it in something with only 4 power, you get to kill their thing and keep it around, and then you get the extra bonus of a 3-point life drain. It does not work with the Rumblespark Energy because even if the Gloom Reaper Hag is in the lane, that proc is not going to trigger the energy because by the time the proc resolves, or the triggered ability from the 3 life drain triggered ability resolves, it's no longer in the elemental lane, so it's no longer considered an elemental. So that's not why I would play this. This is mostly just to pressure the life total and to, set up favorable trades. But it's a really good underdrop. It's great in Cycle 1 and 2. And I used to really dislike this card, but I've come around to it. It's a lot stronger than it looks on face value. Next card is Grim-Gaunt Predator. This one is another one of those cards that's kind of a 50-50 as to whether I'm going to play it. It really is very dependent on the board state and whether I think I can take out an opponent's creature with it. The other part of it is it does have stealth, so it is one that I can throw into the Rumblespark Energy lane in a pinch if I think I can get it to hit. But it's also it's very frail, so it's very easy for your opponent to deal with. So it is a little bit of risk, but if my opponent doesn't have a ton of removal in their deck, doesn't have many aggressive creatures, then it can often be a safe and correct play to put him out. So he also works with the Primordial Slam because he is one of the warriors in the deck, so you can get +4 attack from that. So that's another good synergy with the deck. So it works well with the Primordial Slam, it works well with the Rumblespark Energy. So there are going to be certain hands where it makes sense to play the Grim-Gaunt Predator. But if he doesn't come out in Cycle 1, he's probably not coming out at all that game because the level-gated nature of his triggered ability means that his value plummets after the first cycle if you haven't leveled him up. Next one is Hematophagic Walker. This is another one of those ones I was talking about where it has enough toughness to survive the Herald of Fury. So I may play this just to finish off or weaken an enemy creature, knowing that my opponent's unlikely to want to try and kill this, so I can usually hit it with the Herald of Fury to get a free spell. So I get to do a little bit of a debuff, hit it with the Herald of Fury, and then play an extra spell to get a few extra cards. You know, get a free play is always a good thing in this game. Another thing that sometimes comes up is the deploy ability. You may destroy another one of your creatures to gain 3. If I have the Rumblespark Embodiment out and I don't project it, and I haven't really increased its attack power with spells yet, and I have the Dark Heart out, it makes a lot of sense just to sack it or to destroy it to destroy the Rumblespark Embodiment to the Hematophagic Walker's ability just to re-trigger the Dark Heart and redeploy it. It's just extra. It's just a free life drain. It almost becomes like a vampiric creature at that point. So, again, it's not one that I play a lot, but it does have certain board states where it can be strong. So I do like it, but yeah, not the highest priority for this deck. Indomitable Fiend. This one is situational. There are kind of two places where I like to play this. One is if I'm already applying a lot of pressure, I will throw it out while I'm on Forge. Or I'll make it my last play when I'm off Forge. That way it'll move up the following turn and force my opponent to make a choice as to whether they want to block the damage it's going to deal to them or just suck it up and start taking damage from it. Again, not a high priority card, but it does have a way of applying pressure in surprising ways. The final one is another one that's a really important piece to this puzzle, is the Vampiric Fiend. Not a very strong creature. It's only a 4/3. When it's destroyed, it gives something 2/2. But the fact that it's vampiric, its deploy lets you deal 2 damage to a player and gain 2, means that if I have the Rumblespark energy out, I can play Fiend and immediately transform it. I think all the top tier Rumblespark decks are going to want to have Vampiric Fiend. Sorry, not Fiend, but any vampiric modifying creature in their deck, in addition to Dark Heart, because I found that with the Dark Heart, it's kind of reactive. You have to kind of wait for your opponent to do something to kill the embodiment to trigger the Dark Heart. But with the Fiend, if you don't have a Dark Heart, so like with the Dark Heart, right? If you lose a Dark Heart and you have Rumblespark Embodiment, and then they kill the Rumblespark embodiment, it goes back to Rumblespark energy, and now you don't have any way of easily triggering it. If you play a Dark Heart into the lane with Rumblespark energy, you've created a window for your opponent to kill it before you can play a spell. However, with the Fiend, as soon as you play the Fiend, it's going to transform. So there are situations where it's an alternate way of flipping the Rumblespark embodiment. And it's one of those things you can do on command, which is what makes it so strong. So as soon as you have it in your hand and you have the energy in a lane, you can just pop this guy out and immediately transform your embodiment. And it can really take opponents off guard when that's going to happen. Because there's no way for them to be able to predict it. I mean, maybe with your play pattern, they might be able to predict it, but it also sort of forces them to think, well, okay, you know, what am I going to do? If I assume that they have it, then they're going to have to play to certain lanes. Or another thing I've found is that a lot of people want to block the Rumblespark energy lane, and Vampiric Fiend's a really good one to throw in there, right? Because they'll put a creature down just to try and protect against aggressive, or to try and preemptively put something in position to damage a Dark Heart if you throw it in the lane. This is like a creature that you throw it in the lane, you flip the embodiment, and it's most likely going to die to whatever it is blocking. So you get that bonus attack and health buff to the embodiment or another creature on the board. So this particular fuse has been very powerful in this deck. And it makes flipping the Rumblespark embodiment much, much more consistent. So we'll go ahead and take a look at the spells next. I'm going to look at Ice Storm. Set 1 card, very strong and versatile. Again, it's one of those spells that does not scale, or it doesn't. It's not a good underdrop. Dealing 4 damage and 2 to adjacent enemy creatures does not do a lot in the second cycle. So if I don't play it in the first cycle, it's unlikely. If I don't find an opportunity to play it in the first cycle, it's unlikely I'll play it all game, just because the way the deck plays out, it's usually not going to be very impactful. However, what it does do is just the fact that it's in your deck makes it very difficult. Your opponent's going to be aware of it, and it's going to you can kind of predict where they're going to want to put their creatures, because they're going to be very incentivized to keep empty lanes between their creatures. So they'll likely be playing to lanes 1, 3, and 5, which means it's probably a good place. You can control where you put the Rumblespark energy, and if you put it in lanes 2 or 4, you can set up a situation where the opponent has to put one of their creatures adjacent to another, and you can kind of bait them or set off a trap with the Ice Storm. So sometimes that happens, not very often, but it does create this interesting mini game of which lanes do you put things in. So I like having it in the deck. Spirit Golem Conclave. This one is kind of, again, it's like a 50-50 coin flip if I play it. It's not often the most powerful card to play, but especially if I miss the Nova Elementalist on cycle 1, there's a good chance I'm going to want to play the Spirit Golem Conclave, because it usually means that I had to play something else, like a Thundersoar or a Grimgaunt Predator or something like that, that's going to benefit from just having the attack buff and being able to put creatures and keep increasing their attack every time I put one in the lane. The damage adds up. So it only gives, nominally 3 or 6 attack, but it keeps on giving throughout the game. So if I miss the Elementalist on the first cycle and I do draw Spirit Golem Conclave, if I can find the opportunity to play it, I will, because it doesn't get destroyed when you play a creature into the lane it's in. So it will give me value for the rest of the game. It's always there as a threat. It also makes it very difficult for my opponent to decide where they're going to put their creatures. So yeah, it's another role player, not of high priority, but it does have a place depending on how the game is shaking out. So the next one is my favorite card, I think, of Battle for White-Fang Pass, which is the Elementalist Ritual. This is a modal spell that lets you choose one of 3 modes, or 2 if you have an elemental in play. So number 1 is non-combat damage is increased by 2 this turn. It goes up to 3 and 4 in the next levels. You can deal 3, 5, or 7 damage to a creature or player, or you can deal 2, 3, or 4 damage to all non-elemental creatures. The thing about this card is that if you have the Rumblespark energy out, or once you get it out, it's almost impossible not to play this with 2 modes. You can almost always have a creature in the Rumblespark lane and have an elemental on the battlefield. Same thing with Rumblespark Embodiment. It's an elemental. It likes to come out. It's always going to be out. So once you get that machine in motion, this becomes very, very strong, especially with Darkheart out, because it does increase the damage dealt by Darkheart because it's non-combat damage. And because of the way things work, if I play Elementalist Ritual while Darkheart is in play, I can increase the non-combat damage by 2 and then deal 3 damage to something, which effectively is 5 damage. But then the Darkheart will drain for 4 since it resolves after the spell. So it'll deal 4 to them. I'll still only gain 2, but it really magnifies the amount of damage that the Darkheart is dealing in that scenario. The versatility is also bar none. I can't tell you how many times I've done the non-combat damage increase and deal 2 damage to all non-elementals just to basically wipe my opponent's board of minions or damaged creatures. It's easily a 2 to 3 to 4 for 1. It's like a Firestorm that you have much, much more control over. There's situations where, hey, I don't want to lose all my creatures, so I'm going to do 3 damage to one of your creatures that has 5 health, and I'm going to do 2 to all elementals and pick off all your wisps. My creatures survive, your biggest creature dies. My elemental takes no damage because it presumes I have at least 1 elemental in play. It's just so versatile on how you can play it. Level 3, it's a big haymaker. It does 11 damage if you have both modes straight to the face, so it can be a good finisher. It's, kind of like Flame Jet functions. So, love this card. I will play it any chance I can. The thing, though, is it's not as critical to level if I don't have the pieces in play. So if I don't have an elemental out or I don't have the dark heart out, it still can do a lot of work on as an underdrop. Obviously, it's not as potent, but I do have to be cognizant of what is going on the board during the first couple cycles to make sure I'm applying pressure in the right way, so I won't just like throw this out if it doesn't make sense on the board state, just for the sake of leveling it. But otherwise, yeah, it's a very strong card. It's so flexible. All the modes feed into each other and what it wants to do. And yeah, I cannot sing higher praises for this card. The last Tempe spell is the Primordial Slam. Deals 4, 6, or 8 damage to a creature, and then gives a warrior 4, 6, or 8 attack. I believe there are 3 warriors in the deck. It's the Herald of Fury, the Grimgaunt Predator, and the Darkheart. So all creatures, the Herald of Fury and the Grimgaunt, as I said before, they're kind of situational. So if I'm going down the Herald of Fury or the Grimgaunt route, Primordial Slam becomes much, much stronger. Otherwise, I'd favor something like an Ice Storm or one of my Necrium removal spells over the Primordial Slam. Just because if you're not getting the Warrior Claws out of it, it's not that strong. But if you are, it puts a lot more pressure on the board for your opponent to deal with. And it also forces them to maybe block or destroy a creature that doesn't have a lot of... that's already done its work, right? Like, Herald of Fury getting a +4 attack, like, it's already gotten its benefit by getting the free spell. So it's not like providing an ongoing benefit that like a Darkheart does, or like a Grimgaunt, or like a leveled up Nova Elementalist does. So sometimes like you force them just to have to use a removal spell on it, or throw a creature to block it just because they can't afford to take that extra damage. So Primordial Slam, again, not high priority, but once I go down the warrior route, it is a card that makes sense to play, and I'm not hesitant to play it. Rounding out our Necrium half, we got Dreadbolt. Great card, especially with the stronger decks. You want to have ways that can unconditionally remove creatures, because you can't just let like a Darkheart sit out for multiple turns, or a Shambler or whatever. You need to get that out of the way, off the board, and you can't just wait for combat, because if you wait for combat and to try and take it out with a creature and your opponent removes that creature at the last second, you got a whole other turn you got to deal with that creature. So I like having Dreadbolt. I will try and level it up if I draw it. It is still just a 1-for-1, but I can make up a lot of that card advantage or sort of action advantage with the embodiment, because this will just keep coming back. So it's worth taking that sort of action hit or card play hit of just doing the 1-for-1 with the Dreadbolt, just to have the flexibility of having that card leveled up for later. The next removal is Grave Pact. Not high priority. It doesn't scale all that much from level 1, 2, and 3. It can usually take out a reasonable threat at any level, so I don't necessarily play it unless there's, again, something on the board that I have to get rid of. But it does have an interesting use case in that if you have the Rumble Spark embodiment out and the Darkheart, you can just chuck it to the Grave Pact and immediately get it back. So I do like that. Also, like, we'll reset the Rumble Spark, so if it's at low health but you haven't really increased its attack anyway, you can just reset it, get its health up, move it to another lane where it's better blocker or better attacker. So it, if your opponent is in sort of like chump block mode or something, or they've put something in the lane where you're not going to favorably trade, it's just going to kind of die and only do a little bit of damage to their creature, it's a good sort of release valve of sacking the embodiment to move it to a new lane if you have the Darkheart out. So I do like that. And then Om Nom Nom. Okay card. It's conditional. It's very conditional removal. If you don't kill the creature with it, you can sometimes make a favorable trade at least. Or keep one of your creatures from dying by decreasing your opponent's attack. But not a high priority card. I'll play it sometimes if I know I can get the minion out and it helps with my board presence. Sometimes if I have Spirit Golem Conclave out, killing their creature and having a 6/3 minion all of a sudden can produce a real threat that they have to deal with. And then I think that's pretty much all of it. So yeah, hopefully that gives you sort of a sense of how this deck works. Again, it is relying, it leans very heavily on the Elementalist Rumblespark embodiment combination with the Darkheart and the Vampiric Fiend, just having those ways to just deal direct damage to your opponent, instantly transform the embodiment, and sort of put a lot of pressure on them. But it does have a number of just like high power creatures like the Gloom Reaper and the Venerable Hawkrider, Golem Conclave and Primordial Slam, just to put a lot of power on board to push damage, just to really push pressure life totals. So even if I don't draw the elementals from the first cycle, which is not ideal, it can still put a lot of pressure on the opponent. So it's not just a one-trick pony. So yeah, hopefully you kind of get an idea of how this ticks, what it's trying to do, and possibly what to look out for if you face the Rumblespark deck. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please feel free to like and subscribe. Leave a comment if you have any thoughts on the cards, or if you have a Rumblespark deck, I'd love to take a look at it. I'm really interested in the different kind of combinations that have come out with it, and kind of like how people are working with it. I know Darkheart and Elementals is a known quantity, but it's kind of interesting to see what other decks you compare with it to get sort of different results, or have different avenues to the similar result of just getting the Rumblespark out to keep recurring it. So yeah, like I said, hope you enjoyed the video, and I will catch you guys next time.